Hello, welcome everyone to this webinar on promoting biodiversity through tree seed conservation. Bienvenue tout le monde à ce webinaire de promouvoir la biodiversité à travers la conservation des semences. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. I find as we do our work to protect the land that we live on, we should also remember who the original protectors were. So in the spirit of reconciliation, the New Brunswick Environment Network acknowledges that its work takes place on the unceded, unsurrendered, and stolen homelands of the Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqiyik, Penobscot, Abenaki, and Pescamaquoddy. And as you can see, I gave you guys a little bit of reading on the Wabanaki Confederacy. So I will just give you a moment to read it. All right. So today we have two special guests. We got a surprise guest this morning or this afternoon. So I have Lucy and Donnie Mcphee from the National Tree Seed Center. And they're here to talk to us about the center and about tree seed conservation. So I will open the floor to Lucy.
Merci. I'll let Donnie just share the presentation here in just 1 second and we'll get started. Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present to you today. Donnie and I will tag team this presentation. He is the subject matter expert and he'll be diving into more details on the breadth of our work. However, we'll start by introducing who we are a little bit and sharing the big picture of what we do, and in the hope that we can look to collaborate together in the near future. So as we are part of Canadian Forest Service under the umbrella of the Natural Resources Canada, so the National Tree Seed Center, although operates across the country, we're physically located in Fredericton, but we operate traditionally on the traditional territory of the Wolastoqiyik, but we do also do work across the nation from coast to coast to coast. I think most of you know where Fredericton is, so I won't elaborate too much on that. So we were established in 1967. The original location of the National Tree Seed Center was in Petawawa, Ontario, which originally had the focus on providing quality seeds of known origin for basically research, primarily on commercial tree species. In 1996, the National Tree Seed Center moved to Fredericton. And this coincided with the new commitments from our federal government to the Convention on Biological Diversity and also the Federal Species Service Act. So at that time, the mandate of our center grew to what it is today. So we do now include the conservation of genetic resources under threat from invasive pests, pathogens, and climate change. In addition, we're positioning ourselves to better support national efforts towards the growing and maintaining healthy forests in Canada. And we do dedicate a lot of effort towards knowledge exchange and collaborative partnerships in seed conservation. So a growing mandate means a growing team. In the 1990s, the center only had 2 people. And so fast forward to today, our team is composed of myself, National Tree Seed Center coordinator Donnie Mcphee, our seed biologist Melissa Spearing. We have an Indigenous program manager, Mary Knockwood, and we have our lab coordinator, Katie Burgess, and we have Bernie Daigle as well as our knowledge mobilization expert. And in the back, you will see hard at work 11 of our technicians. So currently our team is composed of 17 members. So we like to describe our work. So just giving you the big picture before we dive down into some technical aspect of what we do. But so we do our operations. So everyday ongoing work to help support our conservation mandates. So what we do is we collect, process, and bank seeds for conservation and research purposes. So we do have a conservation inventory that is untouched and is there for the long term. So our oldest seed lot is from 1948. And our research inventory is available for collaborators. So last year, we provided over 570 seed lots to collaborators and researchers from 76 different species. We also document seed loss information and manage records for data accessibility. So this provides us with information to share on how, when, and where species should be collected, and also know the quantity and quality of our collection. So our seed lot are tested every 10 years for viability. So that's about 4,000 germination tests a year. That's all added to our testing records. So we do have quite an extensive database and knowledge on our seed storage capacity for over 400 plus species. We do manage equipment and innovate processes by experimenting with new tools to identify new low-cost, low-tech tools for small-scale seed operation. If you come to our lab, you'll see some of our prototype that we share the blueprint for. And we also lead conservation research by conducting ongoing experiments. So we do continuously experiment with new species, how to clean, dry, and store to develop best practices. So for most of the common commercial species, we do know that seed collection and processing methods are very well known. So we work with all the other less known species. So the life cycle of a seed lot. So the first step is to collect a seed. I think the next slide, Donnie, if you have the next slide there. Oh, well, Donnie's showing some nice pictures now of of our lab. There you go. Thank you. So the first step is to collect the seed. So during the fall or spring, there is a window of time when the trees are in seed, and Donnie will talk more specifically about that. So there's a perfect time to collect. So we do at the National Tree Seed Center collect do the physical collection of the seeds. So that means removing the seeds from the trees, transporting them to National Tree Seed Center through different methods depending on the species. Once it arrives at our lab, we register, clean, extract, and dry the seed through various methods, again, depending on the species we've collected. We do germination tests. So we test seed loss as soon as they come in our lab and retest it every 10 years. We document our seeds and we store our seeds. So most of our collections are stored at -20 degrees Celsius, but we also store some specific species at -4 and also some in the cryogenic storage at -196 degrees. I won't get too much in details from those species, but if you have any questions on that, you can ask Donnie. The next slide, this is just kind of to show our collection metrics over time. So our current collection is composed of predominantly tree species of economic importance to Canada. However, we are strengthening our focus on non-commercial tree species, so species of importance to Indigenous people, species at risk, also species with small geographic distribution, and also species that are hard to store and preserve. We also house a DNA and tissue bank to support genomics and biochemical studies. So presently, last year in 2023, we processed over 678 seed lot representing 79 different species. So in addition to our operation, we do have 4 priorities that supports our 10-year strategy, which I'll let Donnie kind of dive into a little bit more here. But what I'd like to demonstrate is our close alignment between our operation and strategic work. So we do gather extensive knowledge and information during our operational work that directly feeds into our strategy priorities. And the work that we've done in our strategy also provides and generates new knowledge and collaboration, which helps grow and enhance our operation. And the tricky part for our staff is to balance all of this important work. So what I'll do right now is at this time, I'll pass it on to Donnie. He'll dive into all of our 4 strategic priorities and more on seed collections.
Yeah, so again, I'm Donnie Mcphee, so I'm the coordinator for the center, and I'm going to give a few slides here just on sort of our strategic plan and how it all fits into things, and then we're going to get into some specifics on seed collecting. So as Lucy had in that last slide, we have 4 main pillars, and one of the reasons why we've been able to grow, and I think one of the reasons why a lot of people are on this call is because of Canada's 2 billion tree program. When the 2 billion tree program was announced, the first thing I thought, like, well, where's all the seed going to come from? Because the program, if you read into it, it specifically talks about, using appropriate species from appropriate seed zones and making sure that we have seed going back to the right eco districts and stuff. So appropriate seed sources. And I know, someone who's been in this industry for the last almost 30 years, that yes, if we're talking about industrial forest species, the country's in great shape. But outside of those 7 to 9 conifer species, there are large gaps in the need for seed to support this program. Sorry, just getting. So supporting 2 billion trees is one part. Something we had started actually before the 2 billion tree program, but it's really helping with the 2 billion tree program, is when we're dealing with conservation, it seems any species at risk, if it had cultural or significance to Indigenous communities across the country, we always had a willing collaborator. So we really have doubled down on working with and supporting Indigenous communities across the country. So currently it's over 100 communities that we're working with, and that number is constantly growing. But this is just sort of a roadmap of 2022 of all the communities that we visited and across the country. And again, helping communities, much like we're here to help people on this call to collect the seed they need and work them through it so it's available for their planting needs. And all of this kind of has led to the revitalization of the National Tree Seed Center. Because our overall goal, as Lucy mentioned, is the conservation of Canada's forest genetic resources. So there's about 700 tree and shrub species in Canada. We have over 100 eco districts in the country. So any area where a tree or shrub naturally occurs in one of those eco districts in Canada, we assume that genetically they're probably different. If that tree seed existed, managed to survive, and the temperature, humidity, soils, daylight, all that stuff changes when you move from a different eco district. Well, more than likely genetically they're probably dissimilar, and therefore we should be looking to conserve that genetic capacity. And a lot of our stuff is reactionary. So right now, a new report came out in March of 2023 showing that about 1 in every 4 species in Canada, there's either under threat now or there's something coming. There's a pest, there's a pathogen, there's something that's affecting these species somewhere in the range, and it could be an issue here in Canada. And for anyone on the call, we're already seeing that when you think of Dutch elm disease, beech bark disease, butternut canker, hemlock woolly adelgid, emerald ash borer, and the list kind of goes on. So those are the species that we're kind of prioritizing, and the list keeps growing. And this is just a quick map of the East, just before we get into the technicalities of how we kind of operate. So this is kind of a map of the range of black ash in Canada. So each of the lines on the map shows a different eco district where black ash is known to occur. We work with organizations like CFIA, who are constantly monitoring the movement of these pests and stuff. So that's what the little circles are. So the white circles, like in Southern Ontario, that's sort of where emerald ash borer first came in, and the yellow dots are newer hits. So in 2020, I think it's the last time we updated this. Black ash only comes into seed every 9 years. It was in seed in 2019. So we added close to 600 single tree collections from across the range at that time. That's all we had time for. In places like Southern Ontario, it's already too late. There is no black ash left. It's all being wiped out by emerald ash borer. But when it comes back into seed next time, we're mobilizing constantly with the provinces, NGOs and stuff to say, hey, okay, next time it's in seed, these are the priority areas that we need to go for. So we would do this for all species of concern. And just a quick slide before we get to technicality. So like, why do we need seed? So reforestation in Canada, we plant about 600 million seedlings a year, and about 595 million of those are planted by either for restoration, reforestation, and reclamation purposes. But then there's also the need for seed for research, education, improving seed technology. And then on top of all that, now we're adding the 2 billion tree program. And, you know, when the 2 billion tree program was first announced, there was a slide that lasted up for about 2 days, and it said 2 billion trees starts with 2 billion seed, to which we put our data together and said, no, that is not the case at all. It might be a catchy slogan, but every seed that you collect is not going to produce a healthy plant. And we estimate that it's probably about 11 billion seed that's needed for the program. So a lot of help and a lot of work is needed to be done to collect that seed. So I'm going to whip through a lot of things here. And I was telling Nat, like, this deck is going to be available for everyone afterwards. So don't worry about taking notes and stuff. And I might skip some stuff, but we can come back to it during the questions. But what do you need to collect wild seed? And time maps and people are really important. So the first thing we need to be doing is scouting for viable populations and working, networking, and that's what we're doing right here in this call today. We're networking and bringing people together. And then we need to start planning effective methods for collecting. And then we have to understand that when seed is ripe, we have to be willing to adjust our schedules to collect it. Otherwise, it's gone. You know, we're getting close to the spring cedars. So things like populus, willows, silver maple, red maple, elm, those species there, when you think about them, they're spring cedars, and their mechanism for outcompeting everyone is to fall from the tree in the early spring and grow real fast. So it's a real narrow window. Unfortunately, I don't have a spring cedar. I don't know if anyone recognizes this is a white ash here that's loaded with seed, but that's something what we're looking for. If you have to search when you're looking at a tree to see if there's seed there, it's probably not a good seed year for that particular species. It should be something like this picture here and a lot of the other pictures that I'm going to go into where there's actually a lot of seed on the tree. Through the slide in here, so what you need for collecting wild seed. So, you know, at this time of the year, if you are going to get into this, and this is information we can provide links and stuff where we purchase all of our equipment, but this is a basic seed collecting kit. Pole pruners, a tarp for collecting the seed as it falls on the ground, paper burlap bags, data recording, and all this kind of stuff. But again, we can provide all this at a later date if anyone's, and links to where we purchase all of our equipment. The big, and again, excuse me, I'm getting over a cough here and holding it in. But one of the things when we get into seed collecting is the seed will tell you they're ready if you're willing to listen to them. Collecting seed before it's ripe, it's much like going, you know, trying to pick from a strawberry field before strawberries are ripe. You'd never pick green strawberries or white strawberries and think they're ever going to taste good. So it's the same with seed. We need to let our seed develop and inherit all its nutrients from that mother maternal tree. Otherwise, the seed just isn't going to grow well in a nursery setting. So, and again, this is one of these drier slides, but I wanted to put it up here so you had it. Maturity indicators. So the fruit will, and that's the other thing, when we're looking at trees, we rarely see the seed. We see fruit, we see cones, we see catkins, we see drupes, we see berries. And we have to understand that that is not the seed. The seed is inside that. And just because you see beautiful fruit doesn't mean you're going to have great seed. And an example I like to use is, when was the last time you went to a grocery store and you got a nectarine or an orange or anything that had seed even in it? We don't. It's the same in nature. Fruit, beautiful fruit can be produced without healthy, viable seed in that fruit. So we have to get used to looking for those physiological changes for the fruit, color changes. So again, cones will turn from green to yellow to tan. If you're looking at samaras, and as we use the example on the board here, the picture. So this is large tooth aspen. Actually, it's large tooth in the bottom, trembling aspen up top there. But you'll see on the large tooth, those green, they're really dark and green. That means they're not ripe. But if you look at the picture, I think my cursor will move up here. But up in here, these are turning more yellow, and you can actually see some white specks, which is actually sort of the fluff starting to come out. That's a good indication that the catkins are ready from this populus tree. The other thing, if you cut open the seed, you'll actually see a nice full embryo in the actual seed. So that's the embryo physical changes. And we'll get into that a little bit more after here. So general rules for seed collecting. Number one is you need to possibly identify what you're collecting. That's one of the biggest issues that we find, is that people are always willing to collect seed, even if they don't know what they're collecting from. And if you don't know what you're collecting from, it's probably not much good to your planting program. Make sure that you're collecting from lands that you have permission to collect from. It's not just about driving around and collecting from anywhere you see seed. You really have to understand where you're collecting from, and if you are legally allowed to collect from those lands. And then if you are making those collections, we don't want to do any harm to those plants. So when we do collect, we want to make sure we're collecting in an honorable way so that we can come back to those plants and collect again if they were good producers down the road. I think I'm going to move on here a little bit. Again, all these slides were provided. So this is I hope everybody's looking at the pictures and guessing what they are. So this is silver maple. So when we're come up with our seed collecting strategy, you never want to collect from the first plant you find. And that is because you want to make sure you're getting a good bumper crop year from the population. So if I'm driving down the road and I see a healthy silver maple, I'm not going to collect from the first one, but it's an indicator that, hey, it might be a good seed year. So then I'm going to start looking at the entire population. And if the entire population is in seed, understanding that sometimes it might be male and female, and if there's male and female from that species, only 50% will be in seed. So understanding the species is pretty important. But if it's a good collection year, then most of those trees should be in seed, and that would indicate it's time to collect. The other thing is, if I am collecting, I have to have a plan. I want to make sure that once I collect that seed, I have to have the ability to start drying it down. So for tree seed, shrub seed, almost any seed, the killers off it are moisture and temperature. So soon as I collect it, I need to have the capability of starting to dry it down, removing moisture from that seed. Otherwise, much like food you buy in the grocery store, if I bring it home and put it on my counter and I leave it for a few days, it's going to start to rot and ferment. Same thing with tree and shrub seed. I need to have that capacity to start drying it down. When you are making your collections, and this goes along with the identification, make sure you're taking a small twig and a leaf sample from it and including that. So whoever is processing your seed, they actually have verification that, you said this was silver maple. Oh, yep, that's a silver maple leaf. Yes, that's silver maple twig. So I have that verification. And for certain species, that's not a big thing. But if we go back to the previous slide and you look at Populus, well, Populus tremuloides, balsam poplar, trembling aspen, all those catkins kind of look the same, but the leaves and the buds will actually help make sure it's a proper identification. We want to have a sampling strategy. So again, knowing where we want to collect from, again, having that permission, and then making sure we're collecting from a wide range of individuals so that we have good genetic mixture going out. So some of the factors that affect seed production, seed maturity. So that kind of depends on the species. So sexual maturity, some trees will start producing seed as early as, 5-10 years. Other trees don't start producing trees to much later in their maturity cycle, into that 30-40 years. So things like sugar maple and yellow birch, beech, they much more mature before they start producing seed. We have to understand that trees do not produce seed every year. And that's, again, understanding that we only want to collect when it is a good seed year. And there's many reasons for that we can go into later on. And the other thing we have to understand is that sometimes stress will force a tree into producing seed. And that's a well-documented fact that most tree and shrub species, if they're under heavy stress, they want to reproduce. So they put all their energy, their last bit of energy, into production of seed. So we talked about black ash. It only produces seed every 9 years, but we are finding if they're hit with emerald ash borer, it can be much sooner in stands. So we have to be prepared to make those collections. Before we collect anything, we need to do a cut test in the field. And as I said, what we see on the trees and shrubs is the fruit. We want to break the fruit open and we want to cut to make sure there's actually something in the seed. So again, there's some pictures here. Get my cursor up here. So that bitternut hickory, I know we don't have it here at Southern Ontario, but you can think it's very similar to black walnut or butternut, the looks of it. But again, the seed can look very healthy, but have parasites and damage. This is sugar maple seed. Again, it looks pretty good on the outside, but some of it is parasitized. So without kind of cutting into it, you'd never know that. The same for white ash down here. Like most of this white ash actually really good. Black ash looks really good, but there are the odd seed that isn't full, we can see here. And then this is tulip tree here, that one that was just on the slide. So for collection techniques, for us personally, we collect only from right off the tree, mainly because most seed, most cones, when it falls on the ground, there's more chances that they pick up parasites, nematodes, fungal spores, molds, mildews, and all that stuff that can make your cleaning a little more challenging. But we certainly understand at times we have to collect off the ground. So there's many different ways to do this, different types of raking systems. You know, a lot of places will look for squirrel caches. The problem there is that you can get a real mixture of species because squirrels aren't really selective. You know, they might be cutting cones from black spruce, white spruce, red spruce, balsam fir, and they're all caching it together. So if that happens, then you got a mixture. So you really got to kind of be careful of that. So you got to watch for that mixture. So again, we do most of our collecting by hand. So we're actually picking from the ground, or we're using poles or hooks to pull down branches to collect. Again, these are pole pruners that we use. Again, I don't know anybody who's been in the business for a while, but thank goodness the old wooden poles are gone that weighed like 50 pounds. There's nice aluminum poles now available. And, you know, our staff, most of them can get up like 7 to 8 poles, which means up 60 feet using poles, no problem. And again, I think actually in one of the picture on the left, that's a fiberglass. Those are gone as well. The fiberglass poles were so bendy and stuff. It was really a challenge to get them up in the air. The other thing we really talk a lot about is if you are going to be cutting branches, that you cut in the proper place so you're not doing damage to like creating vectors for insect or fungus to infect that tree. So again, cutting sort of at that branch bark ridge and not getting into the branch collar when we make our cuts. We also use ladders, lifts, and buckets. Again, we know those aren't available to everyone, but if we find, you know, a good roadside stand or something, it's about $500 a day to rent a bucket truck. And sometimes we find that, yeah, it probably is the best way to go. And then all of our crew as well, we put them through a tree climbing course. They're all certified tree climbers. And there is a company based out of Nova Scotia. It's an arborist company, but they've curtailed their program just for seed collecting. So we don't have to worry about chainsaws and all that. It's just a course to get you up in the trees. A lot of fun. It's probably our best day this summer is 7 of our technicians moved down to Cape Breton and climbed a hemlock stand for 4 days. You know, it doesn't get any better than that. So whatever you collect, recording of the information is really important. So, you know, these tree tags here, we can provide them, but, you know, species, location, your organization, project, you know, who the collector is, when they were collected, really important, longitude, latitude. And then you'll see again, permission to enter and collect. You know, Crown land is fine in New Brunswick, but if you're on private land, then you really have to talk to those land owners, or if you're on ecological reserves or park land or anything like that. You'll see the other bulk collection. So again, we do tend to collect single trees. And the reason we do that is because if we find something really neat about a seed source and it came from a single tree, we can go back to that tree. But if it is from a bulk, we would put bulk collection, yes, and in that little bracket, we would put how many trees we collected from. Yep, so we went into a stand of, you know, red pine and we collected from 30 individuals, and that's what's in this bulk. And it's just really important for, you know, your organizers to know that. And then collection volume. Collection volume, right across the country, we're asking people to fill this in because the question keeps coming out. Well, if I want to plant 100,000 red spruce, how many cones do I need to collect in the field? That might be known for red spruce because that's an industrial forest species. But if I ask the same question for populus or for sugar maple or for, hickory or butternut, we really don't know. So we're trying to get everyone, if they are making collections, to put down the collection volume. And then at the end to report back, well, how many seed did I get from that volume? And that's going to help everybody out down the road. Post-harvest handling, again, if you are going to get into seed collecting, sorry, we have to make sure that we have a place to dry that seed. So these are drying racks that you can see here with yellow birch stroberi and then eastern hemlock cones going into them. Again, these should go into, we have a drying room we're here, but as long as you have some place that's open with good airflow, and I think we have some pictures. So this is a larger center. This is actually, I think, from the BC. Oh, this is the Ontario Seed Center. Again, we understand Kingsclear in New Brunswick would have this. In Nova Scotia, Strathmore would have a similar center as this. For us, this is our drying room. It's just basically a big room with, and again, you can't see it, but we have dehumidifiers and an air conditioner to keep it cool, but just a place to dry our seed down. And I'm kind of wrapping it up because we wanted to leave lots of time for questions here and we can go back to stuff. But if at any time anyone, that's on this call, feel free to reach out. We give tours of the center so you can see what we do. We do for the 2 billion tree program, we are working with organizations. So say you've got funding and you want to plant a particular species and you don't have that seed collected yet. If we have that seed in storage here enough to get you going, we would sign an MOU with you saying, hey, we'll give you the seed in your first year, get going. But then we need to work with you to collect the seed and then restock our shelves down the road at some point. Training. So one of the biggest things right across the country, outside of the province of Ontario, there hasn't been a certified seed collecting course. So we've been working over the last 2 years with the province of Ontario and the Forest Gene Conservation Association, and we are now teaching a 2-day certified seed collecting course. And yesterday, Lucy and I were on a call with the province of BC. That's something that they're asking for. I was on a call 2 weeks ago, province of Alberta. So we're going to be, our staff is now all trained up that they can now go out and train and teach this certified seed collecting course. And what the course really does, it just makes sure that everyone who's out there collecting understands the rules, regulations, the guidelines, and then how to properly do it. Best bang for the buck is what the course is really all about. So feel free to reach out. And again, as you guys are going along, you'll see this is sort of a map of our current collections. Again, we have, forget what Lucy said in the slide there, but it's close to 32,000 collections from over 500 species that we have. There's so each one of these dots would represent 15 collections. But we're always looking to fill gaps. Again, 720 some odd tree and shrub species in Canada. Our mandate is to have the genetics of those in conservation. And again, the forest fires that hit Nova Scotia, that's not that far away. I mean, the Northwest Territories, BC, there's areas in the country that were burnt so hard that all that genetics is gone. I had a chance in northern BC to go to a fire site from 7 years ago. There still isn't a single thing coming back up. It was burnt that hard to the ground that all the seed, everything was destroyed. So the genetics of all that area is totally gone. So our role, if we had seed from that area, would be to use that to go back. So we'd have those genetics going back onto those lands. And yeah, I know I ran through things really quickly, but hopefully there's some questions that we can address coming up.
Thanks so much, Donnie. Do you mind bringing back your slide about contacts, just so if people get a chance to kind of write down your email or DCs in case they want to reach out to you, just for a little minute. Anyone have any questions? Anyone want to start the question period with us? Just raise your virtual hand, which is done through the reactions button, or pop the questions in the chat.
Did you want me to keep the presentation up in case there's or do you want me to stop sharing?
Sure. If you can leave it up, that way I'm sure some questions will be related to it. And I can start off the question time because I wrote some questions down. You mentioned something about trees producing when they're stressed, so that like sometimes, let's say, species only produces seeds every few years, but something happens at stress, like drought or whatever, or pest, that it may produce seeds in that like sooner. I'm wondering about the viability of those seeds. Are they just as viable as normal, or has the stress also caused an effect on that in most cases?
Yeah, so it all depends on how localized the stress is. So if it's an individual tree, a lot of time it'll produce seed, but those seed will not be viable because they were never fertilized. They needed another, a male plant to fertilize that seed. So flowers will form in hope that they'll be fertilized. If they're not fertilized, they still enclose, and that's where you get empty seed. They look perfectly good on the outside, but when you cut them open, there's nothing there. So if your stress is localized, like an individual tree, absolutely right, the quality is going to be poor. But if it's a large, more scale stressor that might be done by drought or by a heat wave or something like that, then as long as you have both male and female plants from a large area contributing, then it can be good. Yeah, seed.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Thank you, Donnie. Next, I see that Jay Arnold has had their hand raised for a while, so I'll let you pose the next question.
Hello, Donnie. This is Jean Arnold. Can you hear me?
Jean, I can hear you, and it's nice to see you. It's been a few years.
It's been a few years. I'm questioning here about black ash. Now, if you're saying it's usually, we were under the impression it was every 7 years. You're now saying 9 years, and then you're also mentioning the stressor of the emerald ash borer, maybe pushing it to seeds sooner. When was the last time in New Brunswick that black ash had seeds? Do you know?
Yeah, so and it is 7 to 9 years. So you see, there's a range. 2019 was the last bumper crop year for black ash, and this is, I'm going to add to it because it was right from coast, like from Manitoba to Newfoundland. 2019, wow. Every black ash stand seemed to be in seed. Yeah,
it is quite interesting. I mean, at first I was wondering, do they all come along together, or does a patch here do it? But you're kind of indicating that they all come along together.
They did that year for black ash. Now that was really unusual because normally it's more regional, and it's better for us if it's regional because that's the way we can mobilize to each region. So in 2019, yeah, we basically, our crew, we drove to Manitoba and worked our way back as fast as we could, trying to make as many collections as possible. Yeah.
Do you have any black ash seed available in small or large quantities?
So that's probably a private conversation.
Okay, private conversation. So, we can go on. Yeah. We're looking, I mean, we're working on a 2BT project up here in Carleton County, going between Woodstock First Nation and Tobic First Nation up there. And we have asked people in both of those communities to keep an eye out for black ash, asking the basket makers who might know more where there might be clusters. We can have a private conversation. The other thing I'd like to say is, because I thought it was interesting, your comment about if you see a tree, you don't go and just one silver maple, I think was your example, but we always say, don't collect from all from the same tree. Look for the the better standing tree, and make sure you're not collecting all from the same tree. So having that diversity of seed collection in there as well.
Yeah, so I'm gonna address a couple of things. That first of all, for black ash, because emerald ash borer is just coming into the area, I'm not saying we're dissuading people from planting black ash, but if you plant black ash without a mitigation strategy, then you have to expect you're going to lose it, because there is no known resistance to emerald ash borer, nothing that's been proven. Like currently right now, we're working with the US and in Southern Ontario, going back, searching for any black ash that have survived. We call them lingering black ash. Still nothing is proven that there's actually resistance to emerald ash borer. So if you are going to plant it, you're probably going to lose it unless you have a mitigation strategy in plan. So
And what is a mitigation strategy
so
then?
a mitigation strategy would be inoculation of some time when emerald ash borer comes to your region, understanding you're probably going to have to inoculate those trees for 10, 15 years until emerald ash borer has moved out of that region. Otherwise, you're probably going to lose it.
I mean, we've planted here, let's say for the last 20 or 30 years with the viewpoint of we're in zone 3, so trying to plant with a climate change perspective, planting things that might do better if it warmed up. At one point, I went around the back of the Hugh John Fleming Center where there was a woman who was very keen on black ash, and there was multiple black ash things, seedlings in pots. And I asked her what she was doing with those, and she said nobody wants them. And so I went back and forth bringing those black ash up here. That black ash is slightly out of our zone, but they're doing super well. They're maybe 15 years old now. But if we get a severe late frost, the seeds, the top leaves burn. I mean, these are all the things. If you're going to collect black ash, then it's a bit sensitive as to where it likes to be. But we don't have any emerald ash borer, and we're probably a little bit isolated for that, hopefully. Thank you for I've occupied your time with emerald ash, with black ash.
No, that's okay. There was a second part to your question. I don't see any other hands up. Are there other hands up, Nat?
There's another question, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I wanted to say to Jean, if you reach out to the NB Invasive Species Council, they can help you with that inoculation program too. I don't know if the NTSC does that, but I know that the Invasive Species Council can help you with that too. I know specifically.
I'm going to say one more thing on black ash. So what the US is south of the border, where emerald ash borers have been there a lot longer, like in the Ohio and that area, is they don't want to lose the ecosystems. Like it's a black ash ecosystem, black ash is wiped out. So they are planting, but they're planting small numbers it's almost like a nursery type setting, and they are inoculating them. And then once emerald ash borer lets go, they're hoping that those kind of nursery settings will be producing seed, and then it'll, proliferate on its own.
With their black ash nursery.
All right. Thank you, Donnie. All right. The next question I think in my lineup here is by Tori from the Nashwauk Watershed. So Tori says, you mentioned collecting across a spatial expanse and from a larger population. How many trees? So what sort of area would you generally suggest?
Good. And this sort of ties on to Jean's second part of her question. So when we're collecting for tree species, we try to collect from 15 to 20 mature trees in a stand or an eco district. And the other is we never, again, if it's a bumper crop year and a good seed year, we never collect more than 20% of the seed on a given tree. So again, so that sort of dictates how many trees we have to collect from. So if I need 100,000 seed, then I'm going to collect from 20 trees. That means I only have to collect, 5,000 seed from each of those 20 trees. Is that right? 50,000 seed from each of those trees. No, 5,000, 100,000. So that's sort of our baseline. So again, we try to be 100 meters apart, each individual tree. And again, there's gray areas. If you're collecting black ash and you go 100 meters, you're probably out of the stand. You'd have to, you'd only get one tree per stand. So maybe it's, 50 meters. But we do try to spread it out. It also depends on the genomics of the tree, the life history. So if I'm collecting from populus, which root sprout all over the place, then I might have to go 200 meters to make sure that I'm getting good genetic representation of the species. So the other quick thing I'll say is, again, the seed collecting course, it's a 2-day full course, and we're trying to squeeze in a lot of this stuff in 45 minutes here. So
We have Winston Jones here with his hand raised.
Yes, you've mentioned that you should immediately start to dry seeds. Does that apply to acorns as well? Because I was under the impression that acorns, if they dried out, were non-viable.
perfect, Winston. See, these are the questions we need. So in seed, when you're talking about seed, there's what we call orthodox seed, which is your normal seed. So normal isn't a great word, but it's seed from cones, catkins, drupes, your berries and stuff. And that seed, it's smaller and it can be dried down. But you're right. In New Brunswick, we have 2 oaks, bur oak and red oak, and then we have butternut. Those seed are called orthodox. And you're right, you cannot dry those down. What we tend to do with those once they're collected, we would do a quick cleaning, and you can do a float test in water to get rid of anything that's empty. And then we surface dry them, and that's where we leave them. Now, the other thing with the oaks, butternut, hickories fall under that as well, is they don't store any longer than 1 year. So when I am collecting oaks, I'm collecting them with the understanding I have to grow them next year because they just don't store under normal circumstances. For us, we actually we have a project going with the West Coast with Gary Oak. Because Gary Oak is an endangered ecosystem, so we actually have to excise the embryo to store them, and we store that cryogenically at -196. But you are right, for the oaks and hickories, butternuts, we don't want to dry those down. We keep those at almost 50% moisture content. Yeah.
All right, I have another question. It seems to me that in the cities and the sidewalks, in certain times of year, there are millions of seeds, acorns and other seeds, or maybe not millions, but all over the place. And would those be considered viable or worth collecting? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a place where you can easily collect those seeds.
They can be, but the problem is, how I said earlier that Canada, we plant about 600 million seedlings, 595 million of that basically is by land, it's regulated. So we know where the seed comes from because it's by forestry companies, reclamation and all that. The problem with our urban centers is there's no regulations. So most of the seed that has been used for those trees that are growing, the ones that we planted, most of that seed came from Southern Ontario or the US. It's not local stock. So the problem there, our urban centers are totally different too. Like if you're in downtown Fredericton, Moncton, Toronto, wherever, that's not a normal ecosystem. They're heat sinks. There's all kinds of concrete. So taking seedling or seed from urban centers and then expecting it to do really well out in the wild, first of all, it probably isn't going to grow as well. But secondly, you're really distorting or disturbing the natural genetics off that ecosystem because we're taking seed from somewhere else. We don't know where it came from, and we're outplanting it into our natural ecosystem. And you get into things like it's called outbreeding depression, where you have species that have evolved with our ecosystems, and then we bring something totally different in, and that we don't know the effects, but it can be detrimental. If you're talking about planting in an urban setting, though, I think collecting from trees in an urban setting and then using that seed to go back in that same urban setting, I think that's perfectly fine.
Okay, thanks for the information.
Welcome.
That's something interesting to think about. I've done most of my planting in urban settings, so it'd be interesting to collect seeds that are used to the heat and the different environment here would make sense. I
Well,
had
now,
Tori ask a follow-up question. So Tori asks, when will your next seed collection course be and who is allowed to join?
so Tori, it would take a group like this. So for us to teach the course, we need about 20 participants, actually 20 participants, 18 to 20. It's a 2-day course. So this year, again, we taught the course last year for the province of Nova Scotia, and we're going back to do another, and it's with their 2 billion tree group. We're doing the province of Quebec this year. We're teaching the course in the Yukon and in BC. So you'd have to get organized. We need a group. And again, a group like this is a great starting point to come together and say, hey, we have enough people that want to take the course. And then we could explore dates and stuff. We would want to do it either in the spring or fall, because 50% of the course is out in the field, actually looking and collecting and looking at a wide variety of species. So it's nice to do that when things are in seed. Yeah. There also, I just want to mention too, there is a cost to the course. Again, we didn't develop the course. The course was developed for Southern Ontario. We've spent the last 2 years changing the course so it's more relevant to the rest of Canada. But to become a certified seed collector, I think it's about $400 to actually take the exam, and then you become an actual registered seed collector. In the province of Nova Scotia, the province is supporting it. So I believe the province is actually paying that fee because they want to know that the people who are collecting for this program know what they're doing.
That'd be really interesting if a group of people from New Brunswick wanted to do that. Maybe reach out to me. I can pop my email in the chat. If you have a big enough group, I can reach out to Donnie, and I'm sure we could organize some things around that. Do we have any more questions? Anything at all? I don't know. I saw some people unmute themselves in the beginnings. I don't know if Donnie. Oh, Winston still has got his hand back up.
Yeah, what you said about trees growing in the city being climatized to warmer, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad idea if the climate warms up. I mean, I was thinking about this and I thought maybe the more species and the more diverse we plant, rather than
Yeah,
looking for what's been growing there, maybe we should look for who knows what's going to happen in the future. The more diverse species we have growing might be better than.
yeah. And I think, Winston, I think you're right. But the problem is that we need to know where that seed comes from. And that's the problem currently. So I'm not sure if you're familiar, and I'm not sure where you're located, but the city of Fredericton is currently building its own nursery. So the city of Fredericton spends hundreds of thousands of dollars a year bringing in seed saplings from Southern Ontario. Where that seed came from, they don't know, because the nurseries in Southern Ontario, they basically bought it on the open market. What people don't realize is that the city of Fredericton loses probably 50% of all the trees that it plants. They die. They just don't survive. A lot of them die in that first year. And a lot of times, urban settings across the country say, oh, well, maybe they were root bound, or maybe it was snow removal or salt that did it. But the problem is, if we don't know where the genetics, where they actually came from, it's hard to say exactly why. And so the city of Fredericton is committed, as has the Toronto. There was a big article in the Globe and Mail. The city of Toronto in 5 years' time will no longer plant any urban trees unless they know where the seed source came from. And the city of Fredericton has followed suit. They plan on collecting all their own seed and growing all their own seedlings for urban forestry coming up.
If you're done, Winston, Jean, you have a question.
Okay, well, I've got following up with Winston, who I see, Winston, you're in our area, so we could happily enlist you as a seed collector for working with us, but that I wasn't going to talk about that. I was just going to say that we back in the day when we had lots of young people working, we went to Fredericton with sacks and collected red oak and bur oak from around the cemetery, from around the cathedral, back in the day when the Beaver Art Gallery had nice trees. And we just sent everybody out into the backwoods with a rebar and slammed them into the ground. We didn't have any sort of attachment as to how many would make it. And now in this 100 acres, we have plenty of red oak and bur oak that are producing their own seed. And we're out of the zone for oaks here. So, I mean, maybe I would have a corollary that it's really important to be aware of its invasive, whether it's wind dispersal or dispersed, that I don't think that, we've altered anything except for the better with these trees from Fredericton. And certainly they're not invasive, but the fact that we don't have to continually go and get acorns now because we have them has been, it's definitely been a bonus. And the other thing I wanted to say is absolutely ridiculous that our provincial nurseries, as in Kingsclear and wherever else, that they're not growing a diversity of our native trees. And I've been there several times and I try to get them to break the party line, but I think that yay for Fredericton for doing that. Obviously, it's a huge small income or large income project to have a native seed nursery.
Yeah, so I'm going to step in, Jean, and I hate to. So I agree with some of the things, but I would not encourage anyone to collect bur oak, red oak, any seed from within a city, especially when we have our native genotypes out there. So, because most of the bur oak that was planted in the city of Fredericton prior to 2005, I think, all that bur oak came from Southern Ontario or the US. Now the newer stuff is they're growing their own and planting their own. Again, we just don't know the ramifications of moving genetics from, Southern US into our New Brunswick forests. We do have natural bur oak stands that we can collect seed from, and the same with red oak. I know it's easier to collect in a city because you have, it's falling on pavement, but I wouldn't encourage that. The other thing with the provincial seed centers, nurseries, and again, I'm not arguing with Jane on this, but I understand to move away from conifers, the labor force, the equipment, everything, you have to be willing to double down on everything. The cost, because the provincial seed centers here, in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, we sent them, I think, over 70 some different species in the last 2 years that they're trying to grow. But to do it, the problem is the seed does not run through their current equipment. So everything that's mechanized now becomes labor intensive. It all has to be done by hand. When you think of an oak seed compared to a conifer seed, when you think of a populus seed compared to a conifer seed, it just doesn't run through any of the equipment. And that's the other thing. We all know labor is really hard to come by these days. So I do understand their issues and their problems. I'm not defending them. It needs to be done, but there is a cost associated with it, a large cost.
Thank you, Donnie. I did, since we're at our time, I popped some information in the chat, or we popped some information in the chat about the next webinar, because this was 2 out of 3. So the next one is also going to be about tree propagation, but we'll be talking about the other propagation techniques. If people want to stick around, well, first I want to thank everyone who came. Thank Francois for the live interpretation. Merci. Thank you everyone who's helping me with this webinar. Thank you, Donnie. Thank you, Lucy. If people want to stick around, we have one more question. I just want to respect people's time. Donnie, do you have time for one more question? Yeah? Okay, so what was it? Oh yeah, Michelle asked you if to suggest some species that are more simple or easy to process or to store and germinate, the groups could focus with, I'm assuming in New Brunswick?
Yes, so one of the easiest, and I think that Winston had mentioned, is oaks are really easy. You know, if you can find that site, like a natural site of bur oak, or red oak, it's an easy species because you don't have to worry about drying it down. You basically make your collection, you know, clean the caps off them. We tend to do a light bleach, like a really light bleach, just to kill soak, just for like a couple of minutes, just to get rid of any fungus or anything on the outer surface. You surface dry them, and then you basically store them in your fridge at +4 degrees, and they're ready to go the next year. You know, I know the Nashwauk Watershed Association, we work with them for silver maple, and worked out a lot of things. And I think there's some great literature that we can provide on that. Yeah, so yeah, I think those are sort of your easier. You know, the problem with our populace, that's the populace and willows are coming in. They're really tough because you have to dry those down so quickly. Now, it also depends on if you have a nursery ready to grow seedlings right away and you have a plan for them, that changes things. For us, again, our mandate is long-term, is storing seed for conservation purposes and having it down the road. But if you are looking to collect and grow next year, it takes away some of the things. You don't have to be quite as diligent in your collecting and your storage. Yeah.
That makes sense about oaks, since I've witnessed many instances where I forgot the word in English, les écureuils, squirrels. When squirrels I've seen them plant oaks by accident. So I'm sure it must not be too hard for us to do it too.
No.
And Kate Turner from Nashwauk is asking about the float test. Is it the sinkers or the floaters that are the good ones?
The sinkers are the good ones. And something else, just if you're doing it, and it sounds like Winston had some experience. If I'm collecting from the tree, the acorns are nice and moist. So when I put them in water right away, they'll sink right away. But if those seed have fallen and you're collecting off the ground, and say it's in the fall and you had some dry nights, that seed, even though it's healthy, might have started to dry down. So when you do float them, you kind of got to leave them for maybe a half hour so that the good ones have time to reabsorb moisture and sink. Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know. Winston.
Yes, about those acorns. We have a neighbor here that had a couple of big old oak trees on his property, and every year he'd pick that seeds up off the ground in the fall and just walk through the rest of his woodlot and throw them.
Absolutely.
And now he's got a big stand of oak of various ages throughout his whole woodlot. So basically, all you have to do with an acorn is pick it up and go somewhere else and throw it on the ground. But if you only want one out of 1,000 acorns to grow, but one is better than none. So
yeah, that's a great point, Winston. If you are doing the collecting, and if you want lots, storing them in your fridge and then planting them is good, because then they're not being eaten by mice, by squirrels over the winter. But sure, I think it's, you know, I do that myself in Cape Breton. I have a woodlot down there, and I'm always picking up oaks and stuff and just walking and throwing them on the ground. And yeah, maybe only 1 in 1,000 grow, but that one will produce hundreds of thousands in its lifetime.
I'm not the only one who does that. I also have a habit of picking up seeds and throwing them around, giving the plants a chance to spread out a little bit. I've been personally trying my best to learn more about invasive species. I don't do that with invasive species, but I find it's pleasurable to know that we're helping nature out. I think, is that it with questions? I see Evan's got a coffee cup raised. I don't know if that's like a hand raise or if it's more of like a cheers.
Yeah.
Evan, did you have a question? No? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this webinar.
Can I have one question?
Oh, okay. Who is that?
Jean.
Oh,
We
Jean, hi,
have
Jean.
in another of our plantings out of zone, and this will be interesting to Evan, well, he knows about it. Maybe 25 years ago, we planted several butternuts. They're not in our zone, but one butternut tree. About 5 years ago, the main butternut tree, which is huge, absolutely had a flood of butternuts. Like the whole ground was covered with butternuts. And that was maybe 5 years ago, not one butternut since. So what, Donnie, would you say? I mean, is a, you know, short of doing butternut rain dances around the tree or some sort of magical tree activity, why did it produce so prolifically once and then not again?
If it's just one tree, it's just one tree.
Well, there's other ones that are much smaller. This is really a magnificent tree.
Yeah. So those acorns, did any were any of the seed viable? Did any of them grow?
Butternut.
Yeah, they did sprout.
Yes, they sprouted, the butternuts. Yes, they sprouted. We gave them
Yeah.
to the children and they
Yeah.
planted them everywhere. So there's
Yeah.
others that have taken
Yeah.
root, but none, of course, is at seed level yet.
Yeah. So you need
Nut level.
two things. You need flowers, you need pollen. So they won't self-pollinate. So that means that 1 year there must have been a mature male, you know, tree somewhere, and the winds must have been blowing in the right direction, and you had great fertilization that year. So
Ooh, a traveler.
a traveler. But you know, that's something we haven't gotten into, is, you know, collecting pollen and doing artificial pollination. That might be something you can look into, but that's going to cost. That's a time consuming effort. Yeah. No, and Jean, it's funny, there's certain trees that you mentioned. Black ash. There's a black ash tree in Oxford, and the indigenous communities down there call it the mother tree, because every single year that black ash produces copious amounts of seed every year. And we don't understand
Oxford
why.
where?
Nova Scotia.
Oxford, Nova Scotia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Road trip.
So it's a real anomaly. There's just anomalies out there, right?
Why are they doing it every year? We could have our seed gathering. You could do your seed. You like to go to Nova Scotia, it sounds like. So we could all come along and get some seed and have your 2-day thing.
Yeah, but the problem there is then you wouldn't want what you're planting to all be from one genotype.
Oh,
that's
yes.
really setting
Quite
down
right.
the road.
Quite right. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, it was really nice talking with everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, Donnie. We're gonna cut it off now to respect everyone's time and Donnie's time. If you have any more questions for Donnie, I'm sure he'd be willing to answer them for you by email, or send me a question too. I can forward it to Donnie. I'll be sending out, if anybody wants to see it, I'll be sending out a video for this if you guys want to see that presentation again, and possibly even the presentation if I get Donnie's permission. So you can see it again, do some research, and stay in touch. I would love to do more talks like this so we can keep learning. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you.
I see.
Thank you.